Peter is worthy and so done. By Anonymous. Chapter 6. +1. It had been several months since the last incident with the hammer, and things had been back to normal, much to Peter's relief. Well, other than one minor incident with Tony trying to crash Peter's birthday party, looking prepared to turn the small event between a few friends into something loud and over the top. Everyone knew how Tony Stark used to party. Thank God for Gwen Stacy, who had opened the door. She'd given the man one unimpressed look and a simple no, and slammed the door into his face. Tony wouldn't be Tony if he had given up that easily. He knocked again, this time with the excuse that he needed to use the bathroom. "Use the suit," she had said. It was one time. Why do people keep bringing it up? One time. The man later complained to Peter, but not without a grudging, "She kind of reminds me of Pepper. I like her." Honestly, Peter might have been in love with her, but there was no way he'd admit that to Tony, who had become too interested in his life, as the party had proved, and later the obnoxiously expensive car he'd received as a gift. Peter not only didn't know how to drive, he was so bad at it he'd made people cry. All in all, things had been as slow and normal as they could be when one was a superhero. But as it was, especially with the Parker luck, the lazy days couldn't last forever. They never did. The day was like any other Saturday, when Peter, now wearing the bright moniker known as Spider-Man, was swinging across his neighbourhood, blissfully unaware of the ongoing drama outside of it. So far, the patrol had started off good and slow. He'd helped an old lady cross the busy road, took pictures with a few tourists, chatted with New Yorkers, ate a few hot dogs, which a mother had bought for him after he'd saved her daughter's doll. He didn't get into any fights with New York pigeons, and people were waving at him and saying hello, instead of throwing things and wishing ill fate on his poor self. It was great. The day was sunny, and it gave extra swing to his swing. He just started to think of it as too slow and too boring, when he really needed to stop jinxing things. A magnificent boom came from the other side of New York. It was the way out of his friendly hood, but come on, there was no way he could ignore that, and so he switched directions mid-swing. He found the Avengers, minus Thor, fighting against some lab experiment gone wrong, which made him feel grateful for his rare case of actual luck. Honestly, he felt sorry for the poor ugly things. All he got was a little bite, some horrific pain while he almost died, and cool powers. "Spider-Man, watch out!" Captain America's voice boomed across the burning street, just in time with his spider sense that flashed its own warning, barely avoiding collision with one of the creatures, which apparently could fly on top of spitting out some fire. Peter changed his mind. He wasn't sorry enough not to bite back when bitten. Once had been enough. Sticking against a building, he switched his usual webs to the new formula that had given him so much grief. It was time to put it into the test. It was, however, going to be a little impractical, he realised it now, but that was a problem to be solved some other day. Flinging the first web, he watched as it caught the nearest creatures, stunning them and others that came too close. Yet there were still slight kinks with his new taser webs, but that had to do for now. So zapping he went, paralysing those creatures as fast as he could, buying the Avengers more time to fight against the overwhelmingly huge army of them. He frowned as he wondered whether he'd be of more use lower to the ground, where most of the creatures remained. He really should have done proper testing before taking his new toy out into the first battle. As he switched back to his regular webs, he leaped off the wall, did the most beautiful twirl in the air, shot his webs, and nothing. He'd zapped his web shooters, and now they were useless. They were still outnumbered, and he was falling from great heights. Everyone else was too far. Nobody would be able to save him. This was it. He was going to die, or truly put his healing factor to the test. There was a blur of something flying past Peter. He didn't even think as his hand reached out and took hold of it, and then he was flying. No, it was more like he was pulled with the thing, simply going along with the unexpected ride. He was dizzy with relief when his feet finally touched the ground, and he found himself at a suspiciously perfect location, seeing a huge group of creatures in a neat bundle if he'd used his web shooters. Of course, he could use his fists, which wasn't his favourite thing to do. But Peter's eyes fell on the thing in his hand, and he groaned. The hammer again! Who died and cursed him? A shout of warning and a smack of bodies thrown against the wall, barely avoiding being burned to death, caught his attention. So far, he was the only one who didn't look tired. Well, Hulk was having the time of his life, smashing his massive hands around, but even he couldn't get them all in one go. The Avengers didn't look beaten to hell, but they did look like they'd been going at this for much too long, without a single breath to be taken in between. Even Iron Man's usually so powerful shots looked as though not everything worked as they should. Yet there really was no question what his next move had to be. Anything could be turned into a weapon, and Peter didn't hesitate as he threw the hammer at the swarming creatures, his strength giving it more speed and power than he'd anticipated. The hammer flew in a perfect curve, hitting most of the enemies that happened to be on its radar in one go, and then it returned to Peter's hand that was still out. Not because he'd been prepared for it. Frozen in place, he was looking straight into the eyes of smiling Thor, who didn't have his usual hammer, which... Peter's eyes slowly moved to the hammer in his hand. Didn't he use this hammer when Tony ordered him to hang some decorations? Used it as a literal toy at one point. Dropped it on Tony's toes. The iron suit. It was with mounting horror that Peter recalled every moment he'd used it as no less than a common object, until finally it clicked. As per the Parker luck, it did always get worse. He'd thrown Thor's hammer into a literal trash. "I am so sorry, Mr. Thor, ma'am, man, sir," he was babbling in panic, wondering if now was the moment he was going to die, while the world around him shook violently, not realising that it was Thor, laughing and slapping his back cheerfully. "He is worthy!" "That's great and all," Clint jogged past them to stab one of the creatures in the eye with his broken arrow. "But we still have a whole horde of them, and..." He stabbed again when the thing refused to die so easily. "In case you haven't noticed, we're running out of fuel." He kept stabbing until finally it was a goner. "A little help would be good." Thor slapped Peter on the back once more and took his hammer from Peter's lax hand. "Let us go to the battle, my friend." "Yeah, to the battle," Peter agreed weakly as he stared after Thor's mighty frame, preparing itself into the battle, with his mighty hammer that no longer looked like a toy or trash. This could not get any worse. He really wished the ground would open up and swallow him up. "Spider-Man," Captain America boomed. "We need your help, now," he ordered. Peter shook his head. "Okay, help, I can help." He pushed his horror mixed with embarrassment to be dealt with later and joined the fight. The battle lasted nearly all day, and yet nobody thought to send help. The cops, fair enough, since this was probably way above anything they could handle. But gee, thank you so much, secret agencies with their own even more secret superpowered allies and weapons, and other vigilantes, because apparently Peter was the only idiot to run to wherever the booms went off and screaming happened. Well, to be fair, Daredevil was still recovering from his latest ordeal. Who knew about the others, since it was hard to get close to them when they were all stupidly territorial, himself included. "What made you come up with that?" Iron Man's robotic voice sounded curious, breaking Peter from the depressing road his mind had taken him. "Those webs." Peter flashed back to his last major battle, where he'd lost. It had made him look so uncool. Genius," he waved a hand. "Easy peasy." There was a snort. "I can respect pride in one's work, I'm the last person to sneer at it, but seriously, I was already impressed by your usual webs. What else have you made?" He sounded almost like, "Huh, would you look at that? Iron Man liked something about Spider-Man." Peter preened, too blissful to care about the other tired, amused Avengers. "I mean, I did have some help. Friday gave some good advice on how to make the things more accurate when shooting at the target, but yeah, other than that, it's all me." He was startled by the heavy silence that followed. Friday. Iron Man sounded the most robotic it ever had. Oh, right. Spider-Man had never been in the tower. Never had Peter been so glad to be wearing a mask. He could feel his face go from white to red to white again, so fast it left him feeling faint. Yeah, he said, and winced at how high and squeaky his voice sounded, so he lowered it. I have this friend, it's his nickname, like that guy Friday from Robinson Crusoe books. That guy, Friday. That had been way too close, but thankfully they still made them read old books at school, which was now saving his ass. Or not. It was silent as they stared at him. Iron Man's faceplate retracted to reveal the grimy face of Tony, gaping like a fish, trying to find the words and failing. Thor was grinning so widely and looking so delighted, as only he could, which no one else would, had they been in his position. After all, it was his hammer that had been treated like literal garbage. Somebody, sounding totally innocent, said, It's funny. We now know 2 people who, beside Thor, can lift the hammer. 2 young people, both male, same height, possibly the same body type, familiar voices, one of which takes the pictures of Spider-Man for the Daily Bugle, and yet they're never seen together. What a coincidence. It was Natasha. Of course it was. Spider-Man's mask looked perfectly blank, while Peter tried desperately to come up with an explanation. There was a silence while they all waited, until it was broken by Tony's, No, you can't be the same person. Why not? Peter, the dumbass Parker, asked dumbly. Natasha looked at him with fond amusement. Kid, that's so embarrassing, Clint said. Thor was still grinning, while Hulk stomped around impatiently, chasing away any curious onlookers with his mere presence. You're actually... Tony stammered in disbelief. But Peter is great, while you're spandex swinging... He made a gesture of shooting a web. The webs that only a genius could have made. Of course, that was when he suddenly remembered. You little shit. You threw bird shit on me. I'm your boss. The mentor you look up to. Peter groaned. It was last year. Let it go. And who says I look up to you? He winced, and then with a lower voice he added, I mean, Peter told me he can't stand you. You're terrible and your suits are ugly. Tony's face twisted. It is you. My own intern. The fruit of my loins. Yeah, that was a massive nope. Please don't ever call me that. Under the intense, knowing gazes of the Avengers surrounding him, Peter finally deflated. Fine, you won. He started to remove his mask when a massive hand slammed at his head. Things went a little fuzzy then. No, Hulk growled. Son, we're still out in the open. Anyone could see you, Captain America admonished him, using his my word is law tone of voice. The others were either nodding in their agreement or saying something. Well, Tony was still huffing about the betrayal, but Peter wasn't exactly paying any attention. Once the hand was gone, Peter kept his eyes down, because that's all he could do just then. I think I just lost a few inches. He carefully pointed at his neck, or spine, or both. The others were immediately alarmed and crowded him, asking questions like Clint's. Can you feel your feet? I'm still standing, Peter said through his teeth, while Thor was slapping his back again. Man of spiders is worthy indeed. What a joyful day it is. I declare a feast to be held in his honour. Thor, buddy, you're breaking my intern, Tony warned him, sounding almost concerned. Nonsense, he has wielded the mighty Mjolnir and defeated the enemy. Man of spiders is made of iron, but as your heir he must be. Wait, no, that was a joke, Tony tried. There were some more words shared then, but Peter didn't hear the rest of it, as by then he was unconscious. He finally figured it out, why not many vigilantes worked with others. Who needed enemies with friends and allies like his? He loved his healing factor. was the first wonderful fuzzy thought, as Peter woke in his pleasantly comfortable hospital bed, which could only mean he was in the Avengers Tower. And he was even more thankful for whatever they'd given him for the pain, because this was some good stuff. He'd ask later where they got the goodies, because sign him up years ago, but for now he just enjoyed the rare floaty feeling. It was possible they dosed him up too much, since there was no way they could have known just how fast and far his healing went. His neck and spine no longer felt like they'd been shattered. His legs, while tingly, also felt strong as always. Seeking them out, his hearing picked up on the Avengers, arguing over cereal. Natasha won, the sneaky spy that she was. Clint claimed the unfair abuse of a poor man who was hard of hearing, which earned him a spoon right in the middle of his forehead. And who knew that Captain America could sound so petulant over cereal? Thor was demanding a feast. Somebody was drowning in guilt and declined the offer of the stolen cereal. One of the voices was missing, but then there was movement on his right side, and Peter turned his, both so heavy and floaty, head to look at the man sitting there. "Mr. Sony Tark," he slurred. "How good to see you again, man." Tony hummed, looking at him thoughtfully. "I have so many questions, but I have a feeling that's going to have to wait. You're high." "So high," Peter agreed. "I like your ugly suits. They're flashy and not ugly at all." "I know you do. Other than myself, no one else drools over my suits and science the way you do. You're a proper nerd. The only kind of kid I can tolerate." Tony sounded all fond, like marshmallowy. Peter's addled mind found that much more pleasant face to look at. It also made him feel bad. "I'm sorry about the bird poop. You hurt my suit, so I had to hurt yours." He glanced at Tony, hopefully. "Are you mad? You get it though, right? You wouldn't like it if somebody called your suit rude names." Tony snorted. "No, I'm not mad. Anymore." "Awesome, then we can be friends." Peter giggled as he remembered something horrifying. "I've been using Thor's big hammer all wrong." There was a silence, and then Tony's pained, "Please never say that again. Not for another 10 years at least." Peter, still giggling, looked Tony straight in the eyes. "I threw Thor's big hammer in the trash. I want to die." "Don't we all?" Tony muttered. Suddenly, Peter froze, staring with utter confusion. "You have a beard?" It would be a lie to say Peter was comfortable with more people knowing his secret identity, even or especially people like the Avengers. From his experience, nothing good ever did come out when somebody found out the truth. But it would also be a lie to say he didn't feel at least a little relieved, with less of a heavy burden on his shoulders, now that they knew. Sure, there was some frowning and mumbling once they did the math and realised he'd been 15 when he first started the gig, but as he'd happily pointed out, he was now 18, the bare minimum age of an adult. There was still some mumbling about that. One day he would tell them about his super hearing, but they let it go, for now. They finally gave Peter a detailed explanation of what being able to lift the hammer meant, in both good and bad. Being deemed worthy. That made Peter pale and feel rather faint, looking back on how he treated the hammer known as Mjolnir, even if Thor didn't seem to take any offence. Even after the Avengers amused themselves by watching all 4 videos of Peter using the hammer, Thor was laughing the loudest of them all. Peter wisely kept his mouth firmly shut about that one incident they didn't know about, but when he made the mistake of looking at Thor, who gave him a knowing wink, Peter's horror grew along with Thor's smile. He knew. Thor never revealed the truth to the others, and later he made a solemn promise that he never would. He also promised to one day show Peter his home. Peter may have discovered his new favourite among the Avengers. And yes, they did have a big feast, as per Thor's instructions. They had a good time eating and drinking, playing games, joking around, getting Peter to climb the walls and ceilings for their amusement, arm wrestling. It was the first time since the bite that Peter could reach the point where he was too full to eat. He also lost arm wrestling to Thor, but he did beat Captain America, much to Tony's delight and Steve's confusion. It was wonderful. Even a remorseful Bruce Banner had eventually joined them, who Peter hadn't met outside of the Hulk. It was almost the best day of his life, and he soaked in the team spirit. Well, he tried. Much to his dismay, even drunk, the Avengers didn't let him have any alcohol. No matter how much he swore, he couldn't even really get drunk. But later, after they had finally passed out, Friday allowed Peter to find and get a taste of the stuff Thor brought with him because, as Peter put it, it might be the only time he ever got the chance. Also, he was 18, not a child. But when he woke up the next morning wearing nothing but his Iron Man underwear, with the worst hangover known to mortal man, Peter swore off drinking. If there was one thing he could always count on, it was the Parker luck. Ever since then, Peter refused to touch the hammer. As was the nature of things among the Avengers, that didn't stop them from trying to trick him into it. Anyway, but that was a story for another time. The end. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Have a lovely rest of your day.